Hello and welcome back to Prism & Company. My name is Colin, and on the docket today, another one of my personal projects, HenryDeck. If you have not heard of HenryDeck, then I don't blame you. I haven't talked about it a whole lot. It has been my latest deck that I've been showing off on Instagram, and slowly, quite frankly, slowly. I showed off all the cards up through the swords and then stopped for like 2 months, and here we are. Anyway, I've talked about this deck on and off on the channel for a little while, but I've never really done a full sort of deep dive and showed you how the deck was made, where it came from, what the ideas were, and I thought it was time. But to get to HenryDeck, I also have to show off another deck I made called HenryDeck, but they're kind of the same deck. If it all sounds confusing, welcome aboard. It'll all make sense by the end. But in the meantime, cue the intro. The journey of HenryDeck actually begins with another deck in the collection, one that I did not make, but I just love La Corte dei Tarocchi by Anna Marie D'Onofrio. What an absolute gorgeous piece of deck this is. I have not done a video on this one. I really should. It's one of my favorites of all time. If you have never seen this deck before or held this deck more specifically, go find a copy. Rob a tarot bank where they have it and just feel the card stock, because it's unlike any other deck. I don't think there's a deck that matches it. Is it hard to shuffle? Yes. Is it really obnoxious sometimes when you just want to pull a card? Yes. Can you riffle shuffle it? Absolutely not. Can you overhand shuffle it? Barely. But it's so smooth. It's all hand cut. It feels like cardstock, but also like velvety watercolor paper. Oh, it is unparalleled. Anyway, I could go on and on about this deck. The reason I bring this up in the HenryDeck video is that this card was a direct inspiration, and you'll see exactly why once we get into some of the Rudolph deck cards. I have been obsessed with the form factor of this deck. It's long, thin cards. It's very simple pips. I think they're so cool. There are some things that, if this deck was perfect, I would change. For example, the big kind of like cutesy hand-drawn names. While I think they work perfectly in this deck and they fit right in, I don't really care for them. In a perfect world, it would just be the suit for me, or just the pips, excuse me, and nothing else, and it would be nice and pure and crisp and clean. For years and years and years, I looked at La Corte dei Tarocchi, and I was like, one day I'm going to make a deck like that. It's going to be thin, it's going to be tall, it's going to be cool, it's going to be sleek, and, for the longest time, I never did it. I was working on Ocean Dry at the time and just trying to churn through all that and finish it up. And I really wanted to, while I was working on the Ocean Dry Tarot, not do another deck. It was very important for me to get through that one and finish it. And by the time I finished Ocean Dry, I was like, hell no, I don't want to make any other tarot decks for a long time. Which was genuinely true. It was so much work and so much effort, and all this momentum. And if you haven't done big long projects like that before, you get all this excitement and energy built up, and you get closer and closer to the finish line, and then it's done, and it's exciting for a little while, but then it's kind of this, for me anyway, this like huge energy letdown of like, oh, now it's over and I have nothing to work on. And the idea of starting over at the beginning of that process just sounds like the worst thing in the whole world. Anyway, so for a long time, I didn't work on any new projects. I didn't really do anything card related, at least not seriously. I just sort of dabbled here and there. And then a big event hit that y'all might have heard about that gave us all a lot of time off, and maybe we were all stuck inside for a really long time. And that is where we begin chapter 1, Rudolph deck. Ah. I always sing, and then I'm like, I'm probably going to put it in a musical cue, and I got to like match it to my voice now. We'll see. We'll see if I'm feeling motivated to do the musical cue. Anyway, enter Rudolph deck. I needed a project to keep myself sane. I think we all kind of did, and I decided to do something very simple and meditative, and I thought, okay, now's the time. I already had this idea sort of percolating in my brain for HenryDeck, and that event that just opened up the opportunity for me to have the time to do it, quite frankly. crack open the box here. Oh, there she blows. Now, this is not HenryDeck. This is something I like to call Rudolph deck. If you're unfamiliar with what even HenryDeck is, just bear with me. I promise we'll get to the whole thing, and hopefully by the end it'll make sense. Essentially, what this is a tarot deck that I made with kind of a story behind it. I always have to have a story behind my work, at least in card form, and it's a very simple pip deck, but with some narrative baked in, and this lays the foundation for what HenryDeck would become. If you take a look here, I've put it in somewhat of an order. We're taking a look at the major arcana, and you can see there are no names. There's, barely any symbols or anything. There's usually just a symbol in the middle of the card, and then the number on top. And that's all you're getting. This is not designed to be, honestly, it's barely designed to be a tarot deck. It is designed to be a deck of cards that is tarot inspired, that with as little as possible tries to communicate the themes of what tarot is meant to be. Now, behind the scenes, what's happening here is that there is a character named Rudolph and his wife Rose. And Rose gets very sick, and this is their house. And Rose stays in this room and can't leave. She has essentially an autoimmune deficiency, so she's unable to leave the house because anything will make her horribly sick, and she's just not getting better. So Rudolph, Rose is his whole world, and he goes off on this worldwide journey to find something to fix Rose. And these cards kind of chronicle that journey as he goes. I won't go into it too much. If you're interested, I have all of these majors on Instagram, and you can kind of go through all of them. I've written out bits of the story in the comments to talk about what each of them means. For example, this is his wedding ring with Rose engraved on it as the world card, because Rose is his whole world. The strength card down here, where did that get off to? The strength card is a rose to represent Rose because she is so strong and brave. The Wheel of Fortune is a dice that he's put 2 6-sided faces on because he wants to bolster his odds. Anything he can do to give Rose a little bit of good luck. I'll show you one more just while we're chatting about it. The Hanged Man is an albatross because at one point he journeys across the sea and he realizes that he just wants to be home with Rose and he feels stuck, and albatrosses are seabirds. So at the moment he feels the most stuck is when he sees an albatross at sea. All of it relates back to Rose. It is his whole world, his whole thing. Functionally, while I was making this was all hand done on watercolor paper, and I didn't use a ruler for anything, and I hand drew everything. Everything was pencil and pen. That includes the borders on all the cards, and that also includes the backs. Every single back was hand drawn, and none of them are the same. I literally drew this R 79 times. There's one extra card in this deck. You can see some really teeny minor variations. It's often in that little nook that you can see them. That wasn't just because I'm a glutton for punishment. There's actually a reason I did that, which is HenryDeck, which is the real reason I made this project. But as I was going and as I finished Rudolph deck, I just knew that I wanted to keep a copy of this, and I'm so glad I did. So I ended up scanning all of these drawings and keeping a plain, crisp copy. And it's ended up being just a really nice pip deck. There are the last cards. Here is the extra card, the Joker. You can see there's lots of references to things like card and board games. They were big card and board game players, as I am. So there's lots of chess pieces and playing cards in the deck. Here we have the court cards, and the court cards are themed around the elements, but they relate to a chess piece. So here all the pages are pawns, and you can see just page on top and then the suit symbol. So fire for wands, water for cups, so on and so forth. And then everyone's different. So now we have the knights for the knights, hilarious. C for cavalier. And you can see, the water theme carries, but I didn't want to do the same kind of water or the same kind of branches, so everything's always in a little bit different position. There's different kinds of leaves, for example, in the suit of Pentacles. They're all of our kings. And then the pips, I did two specific things with the pips that I always wish Marseille decks would just do, but they never do. One is that I didn't put any numbers anywhere on the card. Every single card is just the number of pips, and you have to count them. And sometimes with the higher pip counts, especially in the wands and the swords, it's a little weird, but you just count them and that's the deal. The other thing I did was give myself a clue of what was upside down or not, or reversed. Marseille decks never do this. They never give you a hint of which way's up and which way's down. They're like identical. But here, like I put little shadows on the bottom of all the wands. So even though it's symmetrical, it's not exactly symmetrical, so you always know which way is up. That was super duper important to me. And again, hand doing the backs along the way, hand drawing the borders along the way, the whole shebang, because I wanted to use this deck as the basis for a diary, essentially, which is what HenryDeck ended up being. I guess another thing that I did was I made sure that each suit had a different arrangement of pips. So here are the cups. I'm actually going to skip ahead. I'll show you the swords too. I'm going to skip ahead to the discs, or the coins. And, the ace of coins and the 2 of coins and the 3 of coins are the same. But now the 4 of coins is stacked vertically where these are in a square. The 5 of coins are in the opposite configuration. The 6 are the same because there really are only so many things to do. But I did take some time to try and think okay, how can I make each suit feel distinct and different? I didn't want the pip arrangements just to all be the same. And then our swords. Same deal. You can see these are much more kind of separated, where the wands are very overlapping and stacked. Now, along the way, I left in every mistake. This was, like I said, pen on paper, so there wasn't any going back if I messed up. Places like there, where you can see 2 swords are touching, or there, where one of the swords has a thicker little thing. This stuff was driving me absolutely crazy while I was doing it. And, it was a stressful time anyway, so I was hyper-fixating on the details, but I just told myself, the only way out is through. You have to keep going, and you have to make it through. And eventually, I got the whole deck done. I got this whole thing finished, and I wasn't able to print it at the time, but I had it saved in files for when I was able to press the print button and get it going. I actually printed this on the same cardstock in the same size as the Ocean Dry Tarot, and then I hand cut each one a little thinner and then rounded the corners so it wouldn't be a total disaster to handle. All right, so Rudolph deck is done. This lays the foundation for part 2, HenryDeck. Insert HenryDeck. Shout out to my dad for making this amazing box. He glued and cut all the wood for me, and then I painted it. And then we have HenryDeck inside. Same kind of deal. I got this printed, and I trimmed up all the edges and the sides. So it is just the thin cards, very reminiscent of La Corte de Tarocchi. Now, HenryDeck is kind of everything that Rudolph deck is not. It is messy, it's untidy, it's over the top, it's as many things thrown into it as possible. And if you remember from Rudolph deck, I hand drew every back of every card. Again, not a glutton for punishment. It's because every card back is also unique. So both the front and the back of the card have illustrations. It makes for a very weird shuffling experience because you can definitely tell what card you're looking at from the back, but that was not my intention for this deck. This is not a reading tarot deck. This is something different. If we return to the story for a moment, Rudolph was globetrotting to try and find a cure for his wife, Rose. He didn't know what was wrong, but he was looking for a cure. Now, he did not end up finding a cure, but he did return in time to give Rose his deck, and Rose thought it was so beautiful and precious that she stowed it away in her room in an air vent. She unscrewed the grate off the top, tucked it away, and put it inside. Fast forward 100 years when the Skyton family moves in, and Henry is their youngest son. He's, I want to say 12 at the time. We can actually do some math. I'll show you how to figure out how old he is, but he's around that age. and he is very sick. And his family moves to this house overlooking a forest over a valley to get some fresh air and just get away from the world, because Henry has the same autoimmune disease that Rose did. Now, they have no connection to each other, no nothing. But Henry is stuck in his room. And what room is he stuck in? Well, he is stuck in the very same room that Rose lived in 100 years earlier. Now, Henry, being a kid, being bored, is constantly bouncing off the walls, and he finds this deck of cards. And he's looking at them, and all he sees is a bunch of white space and a really cool, thing to color on, essentially. So he starts using it as a diary. So this represents Henry's diary over the course of 2 years. Every card on one side or the other is dated. There's the date there. So you can put the entire deck in order and read the story from start to finish. And that order is not at all the traditional order of a tarot deck. Henry didn't know tarot. He just thought they were cards. So he was looking at the pictures on the cards. He's like, that's a horse with sticks. So I'm going to, make them look like, streamers or whatever. He saw this and it creeped him out. So he, painted the eye red, all sorts of things. Here he saw trees. So he counted all of the trees in his yard. And Henry was really artsy and craftsy, so he used every single material at his disposal. So sometimes it was pencil, sometimes it was paper, sometimes it was three-dimensional objects, like he sewed this key onto this card, and on the back, you can actually see the sewing coming through. Now, I'm going to pause here because I want to show you what HenryDeck really looks like. There it is. This is the actual HenryDeck. It's in relative order, but it's kind of a mess. And you can see it's got all of the errors and ills. And I want to walk you through a couple of cards and show you what exactly it looks like to have a key sewed onto a card. So here we can see the original real version of the Lovers. And you can see there's literally a key on there, and I literally sewed it on. And I did all the painting. And this particular card, I actually glued the front and the back together. And so you can see the thread and the paint bleeding through because I sewed it and then I painted it. So some of the paint bled through. Excuse me. You can see all that stuff on the card. Now, I didn't leave it totally untouched. I scanned these cards in. And let's find the Lovers. There we go. It's subtle, but you can see I cleaned up some of the text. So where this text goes up and down a little bit, mostly for legibility's sake, I really kind of straightened it all out. So it is Henry has very good penmanship. He writes really on the line. And that is more dramatic in some cards and less dramatic in other cards. But I gave myself some liberties to adjust things like that. And some cards I did more than others. For example, here is the 7 of Coins. Now, this is how most of the cards look in real life, and one of the reasons the real HenryDeck is so thick, because the front and the back of the card are separate, because I had to draw them separate, and it's so much easier to, write and do things like this when it's not the actual physical front and back of a card. And then when I needed to, I just glued them together and then did what I had to do. A little bit of a creative conceit, but such is life. Now, the front of the card, you can see, is basically unchanged. In fact, I don't think I changed a single thing about it except for maybe a tiny bit of color correction with the penmanship. Actually, that's not true. You can see I messed up the date, so I drew a new date on top and even a new one because I didn't like it. And then I sort of digitally moved all that stuff down so it has the feeling and the intention of the real date, but just cleaned it up a little bit. The back is pretty dramatically different. There we can see what I actually drew, and there's what the card looked like. Man, this looks so much prettier in real life than here. Like, that still looks nice, but it's just hard to capture real life sometimes. Here you can see the text starts indented, and it's all wibbly-wobbly up and down. I even wrote out some extra text, and then this down here got moved up. So all of this text was just sort of re-engineered and moved around. I didn't usually change the actual characters. I just adjusted them and moved them in Photoshop. Now, you might be wondering what the heck this says This actually says, I had the dream again last night. Wet leaves and metal. One of the things that is hidden throughout this deck is a big puzzle. And I just gave you one for free. On the Joker card, the Joker card, there's a key. So each letter has a symbol associated with it, and Henry wrote in those symbols secret messages in some of the cards. And you'll notice that some of the text is red and some of the text is gold, and I'll leave you to figure out what that might mean. Now, I could do this all day. I literally have stories about each and every one of these cards and how they came together. Like the Seven of Swords, I ripped it up and I taped it back together. Let's see, Eight of Cups. This was my grandfather's old fishing gear. So I actually took his old fishing lures and, oh, that's right, things are separated. I'm so used to being able to just flip the cards over now. Fishing hooks and fishing twine and created cards that way. So there's references, there's details, there's stories, there's so many things woven through each one. So I say, let's just jump into the deck and see what it looks like. And if this is interesting, maybe I'll show off some more someday. But for now, we'll just leave it as what it is. I don't exactly know the best way to do this, so we're just going to give it a try. Just for the major arcana, I want to show you what the original looked like and then what the changed version is. And then after that, we'll just kind of do a flip through. So this is the tester card, or the signature card. Henry marked all the times that he wrote his signature in dates, and you can see him practicing. And then he loved the R on the back, so he wrote all the R's and drew a pirate R. Gold and blue ink on the magician. There's a real theme of the river in his backyard. So we can see the river showing up prominently on the high priestess. Move these out a little bit. He talks about his mom on the empress. He talks about his dad on the emperor. He also punches the wall. So you can see he drew the punch in the wall on the top there. The kind of awesome disco hierophant. The vent key that Henry found in his room. The chariot. Adjustment or justice, depending on your sensibilities. The hermit, and Henry says, why is my room on this card? Because he can recognize that this is his room and it's kind of freaky. Now, a bit of a dead giveaway here. Another theme of this deck is aliens. Henry starts to have some visitations by strange beings from the backyard, and a whole story unfolds. Speaking of folding, we have the Wheel of Fortune, which I actually literally folded in half to make this effect, and I thought it looked cool on the card as well. Strength, where Henry got pressed flowers. The Hanged Man. Death, which is the only card that Henry did not draw on because it scared him. His brother actually wrote on it. Bit of a spoiler here. Henry ends up passing, and Chris, his brother, who he has a whole relationship with through the deck, ends up writing a letter to Henry kind of at the end. You'll also see music as a theme. Henry hears this music, and it comes up all the time over and over again. Henry saw scissors on temperance, so he created a little collage and wrote his note in collage. Henry saw a match on the devil, so he lit the bird on fire. That's Henry's fingerprint. That actually is my fingerprint, and if you're interested in copying it, I digitally altered it, so it's not my real fingerprint. Henry turned the tower into a fort. Him and Chris built a fort that night to protect him from something that he heard. The star. He really loved the constellation Orion. The moon, which is the very last card in the deck that Henry writes. The sun, which is one of Henry's first cards. There's all the trees in his yard. Judgment. You can see Henry drew the view out of his window there, Henry's room. All those eyes watching him. The world. This one represents Henry at kind of his most brainy and wild, he sort of spirals out of control. This is the music that we've seen before, but he's related the wavelength of light in nanometers to music in hertz. So he's lined up that red is about the same in nanometers as it is in hertz, and then he has painted in light the music. I actually did all the work to like figure that out. That was a toughie. And it's hard to tell, but there's a light bulb cracked on the back. And then the Joker, which we have the code on the back of. I'm going to try and go a little quicker through these, but you know me, it'll probably be a while. Page of Wands, Page of Cups. This is actually cut out, and then there's a piece of paper glued on the back that's showing through. Page of Swords covered in buttons. Page of Discs. This is a top-down view of Henry's house, mom and dad's car. He lives in a house overlooking a forest. There's a drop-off and then a river, and he's just completely obsessed with this river. Give you a little context of what's going on in the story. The Knight of Wands, where Henry's mom and dad write him happy birthday messages. Knight of Cups. Knight of Swords. I love things like this where, man, see, I'm talking about every card. I glued ribbon over the top. Also, when I talk about this deck, I try and say Henry glued, which I really don't mean to sound pretentious. I just love the idea that this little kid made this diary, and I love kind of diving into the fantasy of it. So if I say Henry glued on, know that I'm really not trying to be some sort of like up my own butt, whatever artist about this. I think it's fun to kind of get lost in the story. It makes me happy. Regardless, though, you can see the text through the ribbon, but it's softer. It's kind of transparent, so it gives you that cool kind of vibe. This is like the title card, if you will, for the deck. The Forest is Calling. Queen of Wands. Queen of Cups. Queen of Swords. Queen of Discs. Oh, this was a fun one. My mom loves birch wood, and she has a birch tree in her yard. So I actually peeled some of the bark away to use on the back of this, and then drew some trees as well. Fun Easter egg. There are 2 numbers on the back here, and people have gone nutso trying to figure out what this is because there's all sorts of secret codes and clues in the deck. The little inside addition here for you, not a secret clue. These are 2 serial numbers or SKU numbers of light bulbs that I used on the world card, and I just jotted them down on this wood, and I thought it looked cool, so I left them in. It seemed kind of like a fun little extra detail. I'm laughing at myself because I so often wish that people wouldn't name the cards when they're doing a flip through, because I'm like, I know what I'm looking at, but here I am naming off all the cards as we go. Maybe I'll spend that wind power just talking about the cards more. The Ace and the 2 of Wands. These are 2 of the earliest cards in the deck. Henry's talking about his mom and his dad. You can see he made himself a little lined paper and wrote things out. Henry's such a boy sometimes. Like, this is something I so would have drawn when I was a kid. I really tried to channel my style when I was that young. And like, this is a card very early and this is a card later. And Henry has this real development where his handwriting gets better. His artistic skills get better. You can really see it progress as it goes. But side by side, it's like, wow, 2 different people made that. And that was kind of the idea. He calls out the elements on this card. Tape and confetti. This was a fun one. I sewed the card front and back and actually glued the needle that I used on the back as well. Some Mod Podge and some tissue paper. This one, like Machine Guy, Zen Man, or excuse me, Machine Man, Anti-Gravity Man. There's all these little guys that Henry drew all over the place. Dozer Man on the front and the back, just making a little story. And I'm sure like trying to draw a comic book. This card I actually lit on fire. This was my legit pencil test card. So I would start pens on the back. So if I picked up a pen to draw with it, I would like scribble on the back a little bit to get the ink going. And then these are all my color testers. So if I needed to pair up some colors for the card, I would use this card to go for it. Oh, I'm actually going to grab HenryDeck for this. I'll be right back. There are two cards. There's the Ace of Cups and the Four of Coins. And Henry drew them as monsters. So this is the Flying Double Whammer. And this is actually a wooden stick that I glued onto the back. So you could hold this like a puppet. And here is the Four of Coins. And so they faced each other. You can even see their little attacks facing each other. And on the back, there's a win-lose. And the wins and the losses are opposite for each one. I even made sure that the pencil or the pen that I used was the same on each day. So as Henry was, playing with his little puppets that he made, he was tracking the wins and the losses for each one. Whoops, I stole my card there. Henry talking about how he's sick. Three of Cups, I used a little bit of tin foil and actually wrapped it around the front and the back. This is an abstract of Henry in his room, and then the river and the forest. The Five of Cups, Henry drew it upside down. So this is the quote-unquote correct way, or the upwards way to have the Five of Cups in HenryDeck, even though every other cup is upright. The Six of Cups, Henry's dad gets him it says, woohoo, dad got me crayons on his way home today. And so he picks out his favorite colors of crayons, and then he makes himself a little color reference for all the crayons on the back. This is a very cryptic conversation that Henry has with a being that appears at his window. There's that card with the fishing equipment on it. I just love that one. I think it turned out really great. The 9, talking about a blood test that he had today. And one of my favorite cards, the 10, you can actually see all 10 cups, although they're very obscured by the opaque paint. I just think it turned out really cool. Some highlighter on the ace. These are Sir Henry's knightly armaments. This was the very first card that I drew for the deck. I knew Henry lived in this river valley with a forest, and from moment one, when I drew the Two of Swords, I'm like, that card is the valley. So this is the first one that I drew, and I wrote a little thing on the back for Henry. That kicked off the whole shebang. 3, the 4, the first time we really see the full melody. 5, the 6, the 7. This is the one where Chris, Henry's brother, rips up his card, so he tapes it back together. And there's another one of those puzzles, but you have to kind of unscramble the puzzle first. Henry actually writes some words to the song. The 9, 10. A lot of the early cards have no writing on them or very little writing on them. That's because I originally didn't think I'd have all that much narrative to put on, but I ended up making this gigantic spreadsheet of all of the narrative that I wanted to do, all the diary entries, and I realized as I went on that I did not have nearly enough cards to do it. So some of the cards are just jammed full of story, while some of them have nothing on it because I just, at the beginning, wasn't thinking right, kind of like Henry wouldn't. He was like, I'm just going to draw. This card tells the story about how he finds the cards. So I found these cool cards in the floor, but it looks like they didn't finish coloring them. They were locked in a really old-looking box. Luckily, I found the key in the vent. So Dad's screwdriver, he undoes the vent. We can see the key back there. There's Mr. Legs, the spider. And then this is the, I even got my own story wrong. Floorboard that pops up. He goes down, and he finds the box, and then he uses the key on the box. This leaf, when I first glued it on, was beautiful and transparent, and I waited a couple days before I scanned it, and it turned so brown, but I ended up thinking it looks really good. But I was like, no, so close and yet so far. There's our ultimate Peapod Dragon. Another perfect example of a card that I drew early, and it's beautiful, and that could have been a story card. Our little 6 of coins with all the rocket ships on the back. The 7. The 8, which may or may not have been inspired by a certain wild, unknown brand of products. The 9, a little scavenger hunt with Dad, where Henry goes into the garage and finds all these cool little things and then labels them. And the 10 of coins. Thank you all so much. I hope you had fun. I had an absolute blast going back through HenryDeck and seeing all the cards and remembering all the stories. Hopefully it was interesting. I know it's a personal project. It's not one that's for sale. I maybe should have said that up front. I can't find a way to print it, quite frankly, that doesn't require an insane amount of work or huge amounts of cost. So this is not an advertisement for HenryDeck. This is just an artist talking about a cool thing I made. If you enjoyed, please let me know. If there were any cards that really jumped out to you, I'd love to hear about it. If you want to hear stories about more cards, let me know. That could be a fun, follow-up video. But either way, I had a great time, and I hope you did too. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.